If I asked you to picture the Italian Renaissance, what's the first thing that springs to mind?
Oh, that's a great question.
For a lot of you, I'd bet it's a specific kind of image. You're probably thinking of figures in these impossible flowing fabrics, hair catching a sort of stylized breeze.
A sense of melancholy beauty, maybe?
Exactly. And almost certainly a goddess emerging from the sea on a giant seashell.
There's no escaping that one.
We are, of course, talking about the man who really defined the look of the Florentine Quattrocento, Sandro Botticelli.
Indeed we are. Though, to be absolutely precise, we're diving into the life and work of Alessandro di Mariano di Vanni Filipepi.
That is a magnificent mouthful of a name.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But history, thankfully, shortened it to his nickname, Botticelli. And the funny thing is, that nickname literally translates to little barrel.
A little barrel, and that name didn't even come from him, right? It came from his older brother, Gianni, who was maybe a bit on the rounder side.
Exactly. The name just sort of stuck to Sandro, which, it just goes to show you how randomly history brands its geniuses.
But Botticelli, the genius behind the birth of the Venus in Primavera, he's so much more than a name. He's an absolute icon.
He is, undeniably. He's the visual symbol of that entire golden age in Florence. But that brings us to this huge historical paradox we're going to try and solve today.
Which is?
How could an artist of this monumental stature, someone whose work is instantly recognizable all over the world, have been almost completely forgotten for 400 years after he died?
That long, deep eclipse of his reputation, that's the real mystery at the heart of this deep dive.
It is.
So our sources, everything from the earliest, and let's be honest, often biased biographies like Vasari's, all the way up to modern art historical scholarship, they let us trace the full, really surprising, and often dramatic arc of his career.
We're going to try and move beyond just the famous mythological paintings to understand the whole complex man. We're talking his intricate political entanglements, his really dramatic stylistic shifts, and that long, dark shadow that fell over his legacy right up until the Victorian era.
Our mission is to give you that comprehensive, detailed understanding of Botticelli, the artist, the man, the political player, that, most art history textbooks just don't give you in one go.
Okay, let's get into it. And we have to start where his story begins.
In Florence.
Right. And Botticelli was fundamentally a local artist. This wasn't a man who traveled all over Italy, which many of his contemporaries did.
No, his entire universe was centered on Florence, and specifically on the Borgo Ognissanti neighborhood.
It's truly remarkable how localized his whole life was.
He was born, he lived, he worked, and he died almost entirely within the confines of that one district. We know he spent his whole life there, and his final resting place just underlines that loyalty.
He's buried in his parish church, Ognissanti, which means All Saints.
That's about as deep as local roots get.
And his family context seems pretty modest, which makes his eventual success all the more impressive. His father, Mariano di Vanni di Medio Filipepi, he started out as a tanner.
But later he shifted into a much more refined and probably more lucrative craft, gold beating.
And that shift to gold beating is absolutely crucial for his career.
Why is that?
Well, because it brought the family into direct contact with two things an aspiring artist in the Renaissance absolutely needed. First, the materials themselves, but maybe more importantly,
the wealthy clients? The people who could actually afford gilded artwork and commissioned paintings.
Precisely. Vasari, the 16th century chronicler, even notes that Botticelli's first training wasn't with the paintbrush. It was as a goldsmith.
Which was a very common starting point for so many masters in Florence, wasn't it? It wasn't about the painting itself, not yet. It was about precision.
Exactly. And that goldsmith training, it instills this dedication to line and to clear contours, this ability to execute these finely wrought details.
All the hallmarks of his mature style. The fact that the line, the contour, always seems more important than shadow or volume in his work. You can trace that right back to this early training.
Absolutely. And, while the Ognissanti neighborhood was home to workmen and weavers, it also housed the powerful families who were essentially fueling the Renaissance.
So his family rented from the Rucellai, a major banking and merchant dynasty. And critically, they lived right next door to the Vespucci family.
That Vespucci connection is just vital. They were staunch allies of the ruling Medici family, and they immediately became these regular, powerful patrons for the young Botticelli.
Just think about that. One of his neighbors was Amerigo Vespucci, the explorer.
The man the Americas were named after.
He was literally rubbing shoulders with the financial, political, and exploratory elite of Florence right outside his childhood home. He was in the perfect spot for advancement.
So he's in the right place. He has this foundational skill, and then he lands the perfect mentor. Around 1461 or 1462, he gets apprenticed to the great Fra Filippo Lippi.
And Lippi was the ideal teacher, not just for his skill, but because he was already a huge favorite of the Medici family.
So this apprenticeship gives Botticelli an invaluable entry point into the most powerful artistic patronage network in the entire city.
And you can see the stylistic influence so clearly. Botticelli's early work just soaks up Lippi's distinct characteristics, that intimate composition, those incredibly clear outlines, and the development of figures that are beautiful, but have this certain, almost poetic melancholy.
The DNA of Lippi is in the faces Botticelli painted for decades.
By 1467, he'd left Lippi's workshop, and within just a couple of years, he had his own shop and was getting major independent work.
Which led to this crucial early commission in 1469 for the painting of Fortitude.
And this was a huge moment for him because it threw him into direct, very high-stakes competition with an established artist, Piero del Polaiuolo.
Right. The commission was for a set of 7 virtues for the Merchants' Tribunal, and Polaiuolo had already started the series. Botticelli was brought in to finish it.
So this was a clear professional challenge, and Botticelli just rose to the occasion, showcasing his technical superiority.
Our sources from the time, they emphasize that Botticelli's figure of Fortitude was just so much more elegant and artfully designed than Polaiuolo's. One account even mentions fanciful enrichments so as to show up Piero's poverty of ornamental invention.
Yeah, it is basically a historical burn.
It is.
He didn't just meet the standard. He elevated the whole project and made his competitor look old-fashioned. It was a clear declaration of his independent genius.
And by 1472, he cements his new status by taking on his first apprentice, Filippino Lippi, the son of his late master.
Which shows loyalty, but also professional standing. Their works from this period, especially all the Madonna and child paintings, are so similar that scholars still find them hard to tell apart.
His fame was now starting to spread beyond Florence. In 1474, he was briefly summoned to Pisa to fresco the Camposanto there.
And even though those specific works don't survive, the simple fact that a city like Pisa was willing to pull him away from local projects, it just speaks volumes about his growing reputation.
But the real climax of his early style, the work that truly exploded his profile within Florence, was the Adoration of the Magi from around 1475.
This is a masterpiece that works on 2 levels, isn't it? It's religious art, but it's also political portraiture.
Exactly. It was placed in the very public, widely visited church of Santa Maria Novella, which guaranteed maximum exposure. And while it was commissioned by a money changer, it really served as this monument to the most powerful family in Florence.
The Medici.
Of course. The cast of characters is just incredible. You've got the deceased patriarch, Cosimo de' Medici, as the oldest magus, with his sons Piero and Giovanni right there.
And then the next generation, the current rulers, Lorenzo Magnifico and his brother Giuliano. It's a stunning visual roll call of Medici power, seamlessly woven into a devotional scene.
And contemporaries just celebrated it for the sheer variety of facial angles and expressions Botticelli captured. It proved he was a master of psychological depth, not just beautiful lines.
And if you look closely, he even put himself in the painting.
He did, standing prominently on the far right, making eye contact directly with you, the viewer.
He was literally placing himself, the successful artist, right inside the orbit of the city's rulers.
And his immersion in that Medici orbit was total. He wasn't just hired to paint beautiful family portraits, he became this integral part of their political propaganda machine.
And that meant getting his hands dirty.
This is where the story gets really dramatic, and where Botticelli proves he was ready to take huge political risks for his patrons. The year is 1478.
The Pazzi conspiracy.
The brutal attempt by the rival Pazzi family to assassinate the 2 key Medici brothers, Lorenzo and Giuliano.
Giuliano was killed, Lorenzo survived, and just unleashed this brutal retaliation.
And Botticelli was immediately commissioned to paint a huge fresco on the wall of the customs house, right near the center of government. This was a form of public shaming known as pittura infamante.
Which literally translates to painting of infamy.
It was a Florentine custom where traitors or conspirators who had fled or been executed would be painted in a degrading position, usually hanging by their heels, in a highly visible public place.
So it was a visual act of state-sanctioned humiliation. A warning.
A very powerful one. So Botticelli was painting the execution of the leaders of the Pazzi conspiracy. His artwork became this massive, terrifying public billboard advertising the absolute power of the surviving Medici.
It just confirms his deep, undeniable alliance with the ruling faction.
And that fresco was so politically inflammatory that the Pope himself protested. One of the figures depicted was an archbishop. Eventually, the entire thing was destroyed in 1494 when the Medici were kicked out of Florence for a while.
But for 16 years, Botticelli's image defined public justice in the city. It's such a stark contrast to the grace of Venus, isn't it?
It is. He could do the idyllic, but he could also do the ugly, necessary work of political terror.
His ability to handle that kind of high-stakes competition was proven again in 1480 with the Ognissanti competition, right back in his home parish.
That's right. His neighbors, the Vespucci family, commissioned him to paint St. Augustine in his study, and they placed it directly opposite a competing work, St. Jerome, by Domenico Ghirlandaio.
And Ghirlandaio was rapidly becoming Botticelli's main artistic rival in the city.
So that side-by-side rivalry must have been intense. You had the city's two leading masters competing for honor and patronage, knowing their work would be permanently compared. One art historian noted that this kind of direct competition always pushed Botticelli to put out all his powers.
And his St. Augustine, his earliest surviving fresco, is considered one of his finest pieces. But we also get this wonderfully clear glimpse of his famous wit in this piece, don't we?
We do. Vasari tells this story. If you look at the open book above St. Augustine, there are some what look like trivial scribbles. They're actually a practical joke.
A joke in a church fresco.
An inside joke, yeah. Possibly aimed at the religious order running the church. A recognizable line reads, "Where's Brother Martino?" He went out. And where did he go? He is outside Porta al Prato.
So it's a piece of overheard, everyday dialogue just scribbled into the painting.
Exactly. It suggests he had this sharp sense of humor, maybe a little irreverence. He was a master, but also a man of mischief.
So he's established himself as this dominant, politically powerful, and witty figure in Florence. And that combination of skill and influence leads directly to his greatest career milestone.
The summons to Rome. The Sistine Chapel Commission in 1481.
And this wasn't just a prestigious job, it was deeply political.
It was. It was brokered as part of a peace deal between Lorenzo de' Medici and Pope Sixtus V, following all the hostilities that erupted after the Pozzigi conspiracy. To seal the deal, the Pope summoned Botticelli, along with other top Florentine masters like Ghirlandaio and Perugino, to fresco the newly completed chapel walls.
The logistics of that must have been staggering.
A massive, rapid endeavor. The artists were on incredibly tight deadlines. Each of the main narrative panels was enormous, about 3.5 by 5.5 meters.
And they had to be done in a matter of months.
Right, which meant relying heavily on a skilled team of assistants. Botticelli contributed 3 of the large scenes to the paired cycles, illustrating the life of Christ and the life of Moses.
The entire cycle was designed to assert papal supremacy, wasn't it?
It was. It was all about showing the continuity and divine origin of the Pope's authority. But what's fascinating is how Botticelli approached the composition.
How so?
Unlike his peers, who sort of spread the narrative across the canvas, Botticelli often imposed this triptych-like structure. He'd divide each huge scene into a distinct central group and 2 flanking groups, often showing 3 different incidents within the same panel.
And that shows his learning, his erudition. In The Punishment of the Sons of Korah, he includes this really prominent copy of the Arch of Constantine.
Right, the great Roman triumphal arch. And that wasn't just some background detail. It shows that even when he was painting religious stories, he was consciously engaging with the language of classical antiquity and imperial power.
He also designed 10 of the invented portraits of the earliest popes high up on the chapel walls. But here's the critical point. He was only in Rome for a very short time.
A very short time. From July 1481 to May 1482. Then he went straight back to Florence. His heart and his workshop always remained in his home city.
So the 1480s, right after he gets back from Rome, that's undeniably his most successful, his most creatively potent decade.
Without a doubt. This is the period that defined him for all future generations, even if the works themselves were kept in private hands for centuries.
We are talking, of course, about the monumental mythological subjects, Primavera from about 1482 and The Birth of Venus around 1485.
And the scale of these 2 works, depicting subjects from classical mythology, it was truly revolutionary. You just didn't see huge secular mythological canvases in Western art on this scale since ancient times.
They're the very definition of Renaissance humanism.
And their aesthetic appeal is so immediate, so profound. The figures have this quality of idealized, dominant female beauty. Vasari famously defined his style as having grace, a kind of lightness and elegance that was instantly recognizable.
And later in the 19th century, John Ruskin would focus on their amazing linear rhythm, defined by those soft, continuous contours and that delicate use of pastel colors.
It's the visual language that just grabs you. But beneath that immediate beauty, there's a deep, complex, philosophical layer.
Largely revolving around Renaissance Neoplatonism.
This is a crucial concept we have to unpack to really get these paintings. Neoplatonism, as it was championed by the Medici's intellectual circle, was this philosophical attempt to reconcile classical pagan thought with Christian devotion.
The idea being that the earthly world was just a reflection of the divine spiritual world.
Exactly.
So how does that relate to a nude Venus riding a seashell?
Well, for the Neoplatonists, Venus wasn't just the goddess of carnal love. She became Venus Urania, or celestial Venus, the personification of divine love, beauty, and charity.
Ideals that were entirely compatible with Christian morality.
Precisely. By depicting Venus, Botticelli could explore these profound Christian-adjacent concepts using the powerful visual language of the ancient world. It justified the monumental scale.
So the scholars who commissioned these could enjoy the classical nudity while reading this deeply sophisticated philosophical meaning into it.
You got it. However, the exact commission and the original location of these paintings, that remains a subject of really intense scholarly debate.
Right. Because Vasari saw them both together at the Medici Villa di Castello in the mid-16th century, but earlier evidence suggests they had different origins.
A Medici inventory from 1499, for instance, suggests that Primavera was initially painted for the townhouse of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, Lorenzo il Magnifico's cousin.
And that inventory suggests it was displayed with another mythological work, Pallas and the Centaur.
And the birth of Venus might have been commissioned for a completely different patron or place altogether, and only later consolidated with the others at the villa. So the idea that these two incredibly famous pieces were conceived as a single pair from the start is probably a later romantic interpretation.
Let's look closer at some of the mythological works and the clues Botticelli embedded in them. Take Venus and Mars from around 1485.
Its long rectangular shape strongly suggests it was a spoliera, meaning it was designed to be fitted into the wall paneling or furniture of a room.
And here we get a beautiful little piece of visual detective work. If you look closely, you see tiny wasps buzzing around the head of the sleeping Mars.
That's not just a random nature detail.
Why wasps? That is way too specific to be an accident.
Because the Vespucci family name, his close neighbors and important patrons, literally translates to little wasps in Italian.
And they featured wasps on their coat of arms.
Exactly. So since the painting shows Mars asleep after lovemaking, being teased by these little infant satyrs, it was almost certainly a celebratory piece commissioned for a Vespucci marriage. It just reinforces that family connection.
It really emphasizes how intertwined art and civic identity were in Florence. These weren't just decorations, they were personalized symbols of lineage and political alignment.
And we see that political alignment even more clearly in Pallas and the Centaur from 1482.
The composition shows the wild centaur representing untamed passion and brute instinct being subdued by the goddess Pallas, who embodies reason and wisdom.
And Pallas's dress is emblazoned with the interlocking rings that were the specific symbol of the Medici family.
So the interpretation is almost unavoidable. It's a clear statement favoring Medici, illustrating the triumph of reason and civilization over chaos.
It's powerful visual messaging.
Beyond these huge mythologies, this era also saw him producing major narrative works, which required a completely different kind of storytelling skill. I'm thinking of the 4 panels illustrating Boccaccio's story of Nastagio degli Onesti.
Commissioned in 1483 by Antonio Pucci for his son's wedding. And again, the patronage is key. You can see the coats of arms of the Medici and the families involved right there in the 3rd panel. These panels really show Botticelli's versatility, moving from the ethereal grace of Venus to this lively, sequential, visual storytelling. This period is Botticelli at the absolute height of his influence and mastery.
The 1480s were Botticelli's absolute peak, financially and in terms of influence. But the next decade, the 1490s, that brought this massive political and religious upheaval to Florence.
And that, in turn, triggered a dramatic and profound shift in his artistic style and his focus.
That's right. Although the mythological masterpieces dominate his modern reputation, his working catalog was always primarily focused on religious commissions, especially after he came back from Rome.
And his reputation was so strong by then that many of these commissions were for larger, more expensive altarpieces.
So let's look at how his technique and his style began to evolve in these religious works, moving away from that polished humanism of the mythological era. We can start with the Bardi altarpiece, finished around 1484.
Okay, so here we see the Madonna and Child in a very traditional, quiet setting. A hortus conclusus, a closed garden, which symbolized the Virgin's purity. It's elegant, it's detailed, but already Botticelli is starting to play with the artistic conventions of the day.
How so?
Well, you can see his very relaxed approach to strict linear perspective, which was all the rage with his contemporaries.
Right.
The top ledge of the stone bench the Madonna sits on is clearly viewed from above, but the vases of lilies on it are shown as if you're looking up at them from below.
So it's a deliberate, non-mathematical rendering. He's prioritizing design over absolute naturalism.
Exactly. And that intentional deviation is important because it really foreshadows his later, more radical shifts. If we move to the San Barnabas altarpiece around 1487, we see the clear emergence of what art historians call his emotional late style.
What does that mean, emotional late style?
In this work, the setting is much grander, a palatial, heavenly interior, which shows his new interest in complex architecture. But the figures themselves change dramatically. The heads are sometimes larger, the expressions are varied and intense, and the whole thing feels more crowded.
So the effortless grace of Venus is being replaced by something else.
It's being replaced by this palpable sense of anxiety and fervent devotion.
And that intensity gets amplified in the works that follow, like the Cestello Annunciation. That painting has a really somber background and an exaggerated expressiveness, especially in the dramatically bending poses of the Virgin and the angel.
The shift really culminates in works like the two Lamentations from the early 1490s. In these, the figures are crowded and tightly intertwined around the body of Christ. They consume nearly all the picture space.
The visual language is moving closer to an intense, almost Gothic emotionalism.
Right, rather than the refined rationalism of the High Renaissance that was just getting started. And you see a technical change in those Lamentation paintings, too.
In how he treats the halos, right?
Yes. In the Munich Lamentation, for example, all the figures except Christ are given these flat halos that are shown in perspective, a convention he used consistently from then on. It's a move toward a more symbolic, simpler, visual element.
Now we have to address the colossal influence of Girolamo Savonarola, this moralistic Dominican friar who preached these fire and brimstone sermons in Florence from 1490 until he was executed in 1498.
And his impact on Florentine life and art was just immense.
Vasari's account of Botticelli's devotion to Savonarola is legendary. He claimed Botticelli became a fanatical follower, one of the Piagnoni, meaning snivellers or weepers.
Right, that was the term for the friar's devoted followers. And Vasari claimed this devotion was ruinous for Botticelli's career. He says Botticelli gave up painting entirely, fell into poverty, and would have starved if his friends hadn't helped him.
So he paints Botticelli as this tragic artist whose talent was just abandoned because of religious zealotry.
That story is certainly compelling, but modern scholarship provides a really crucial counterpoint.
So it's not the whole story.
Not at all. While Botticelli was undoubtedly moved by Savonarola's messages, many Florentines were, the idea that he quit painting and starved is now seen as a huge exaggeration.
Why would Vasari exaggerate it?
Because it makes for a better story. It's a narrative about the perils of religious fanaticism, which fit Vasari's own intellectual outlook. While Botticelli's production did slow down after the political chaos of 1495, we have concrete evidence that he was still available for work later.
And what's that evidence?
In late 1502, 4 years after Savonarola's execution, the powerful patron Isabella d'Este was looking for a Florentine painter. Her agent reported back that Botticelli was free to start at once and ready to oblige, which indicates he was actively looking for work.
But she didn't hire him.
No, she chose to wait for Perugino instead, which suggests Botticelli wasn't the first choice of the most sophisticated patrons anymore, but he was far from the starving hermit Vasari describes.
Even if he wasn't starving, his style certainly underwent this radical, almost archaic transformation that put him totally out of step with the new High Renaissance.
This is maybe the most fascinating part of his late career. While Leonardo and the young Michelangelo were obsessively perfecting naturalism and perspective, Botticelli deliberately moved backward. He embraced this simplified, non-naturalistic visual language.
And the prime example of that is the Mystical Nativity from around 1500.
That's his only dated painting, and it's cryptically inscribed with Greek text that references the upheaval of the period. It's a very small, intensely personal, and highly idiosyncratic work. The iconography is unique, packed with details like these little devils hiding in the rocks below the scene.
And visually, it just defies all the new rules of painting. The scale is completely inconsistent.
Precisely. The Holy Family is painted much, much larger than the surrounding figures, even the ones that are visually closer to the viewer. This is a clear, conscious return to the visual conventions of the earlier Gothic period.
It was a stylistic rejection of the High Renaissance.
A complete rejection. And he also tackled powerful political allegory in this archaic style. We have to talk about the mystic crucifixion from around the same time.
This piece is a direct allegory of the political and religious convulsions Florence was going through. It shows Christ on the cross, but beside him is the Marzocco Florence's heraldic lion.
The ultimate symbol of the Florentine Republic and its liberty. Seeing it in a painting was a direct representation of Florence itself.
And in Botticelli's painting, an angel is shown violently whipping the lion.
It's an incredibly powerful and disturbing image. And for a contemporary Florentine viewer, it would have directly represented the divine judgment being passed upon Florence for all its chaos. The expulsion of the Medici, Savonarola's rule, the French invasions.
The whipping of the lion symbolized the suffering of the Republic under divine punishment.
Exactly. His very last works, like the scenes from the life of Saint Zenobius, they push this expressive distortion even further. He used non-naturalistic colors and figures that appear intentionally simplified and exaggerated in their emotion.
These final pieces are a real puzzle for art historians.
They are. Some compare them to the intense, devout simplicity of the earlier master for Angelico. Others see these tormented figures as sort of anticipating the emotional exaggeration of mannerism. It's a profoundly personal, often troubled and visually confusing final phase that ensured he was completely out of step with the tastes of the new century.
Okay, so moving away from the grand altarpieces, we have to talk about the economic backbone of Botticelli's workshop,
His steady income.
which came from producing countless Madonna and child paintings.
Absolutely. These devotional images were enormously popular and provided this reliable source of income for his shop. They were the bread and butter of his business.
And he didn't just paint them, he pioneered a specific format for them, the large round tondo.
Yes, the tondo format, this large circular painting, often over a meter across, was crucial to his legacy. Before Botticelli, this shape was often reserved for smaller decorative works. He elevated the tondo to a prestigious, major artistic statement, usually reserved for the palaces of the ultra-wealthy.
And you can see his mastery of the format in the Magnificat Madonna from about 1483.
It's a perfect example. Mary is writing down the Magnificat, and she's surrounded by these incredibly beautiful, wingless angels who look less like celestial beings and more like, fashionable Florentine youths with perfect hair and clothes.
Which, of course, eventually drew some fire.
It did. Savonarola was known to complain bitterly that some church paintings made the Virgin appear dressed as a whore, suggesting Botticelli's high-fashion Madonnas were maybe a little too secularly beautiful for devotional use.
His approach to secular portraits was equally distinctive, though it's important to clarify that he painted far fewer actual portraits than have been attributed to him over the years.
Right. Many of those idealized female figures, the ones often linked by romantic gossip to the legendary beauty Simonetta Vespucci.
The uncrowned Queen of Florence.
They probably don't represent specific people. They're idealized concepts of beauty, secular equivalents of his graceful Madonnas.
But when he did paint a portrait, he followed specific conventions. Women almost always in profile, men in the popular three-quarters pose.
And he favored very plain settings, often just an open window showing the sky, avoiding the detailed landscape backgrounds that other artists loved.
The famous portrait of a man with a medal of Cosimo the Elder from 1474 is a great technical example.
What's so unique about that work is that the medal the man is holding isn't just painted. It's an actual inserted gesso cast of a real commemorative medal of Cosimo de' Medici.
So he's integrating a sculptural element right into the painting.
It's a mark of his technical ingenuity and his continued use of Medici iconography.
Beyond painting, Botticelli had this lifelong, almost obsessive interest in the great Florentine poet Dante Alighieri.
He did. Not only is he credited with perhaps the most famous imagined portrait of Dante, but he also made this significant, if commercially difficult, foray into printmaking. He designed illustrations for the first printed edition of Dante's Divine Comedy in 1481.
That print project, engraved by Baccio Baldini, was something of a failure, wasn't it?
It was. It was very ambitious, but only 19 of the required 100 illustrations were actually engraved and published.
What was the problem?
It seems to have been technical. Baldini, the engraver, just didn't have the skill to translate the delicacy and intricate detail of Botticelli's designs onto the copper plate.
So he compensated for the failure of the printed edition by launching an even more luxurious, more ambitious project.
The Luxury Manuscript Dante Project. This time, he illustrated the Divine Comedy on parchment, creating these highly detailed, exquisite drawings.
And the 93 surviving pages, now split between the Vatican and Berlin, represent the bulk of his surviving graphic work. Even incomplete, they're just astonishing.
So let's quickly talk about the man himself. Vasari gave us this impression that Botticelli wasted it all through carelessness after his religious conversion, implying severe poverty.
But that financial narrative seems largely inaccurate.
Right. He owned property, including a small country villa, and he continued to live and work in the family home right up until his death in 1510. He seems to have been financially comfortable, if not as business savvy as some of his rivals.
And he never married.
No. And he gave us that famous anecdote about his profound dislike of the idea. When his patrons suggested he marry, Botticelli recounted a dream where he had married. He woke up struck with grief and then claimed he walked the streets for 2 days to stop the dream from restarting.
That is a remarkably visceral reaction to the idea of marriage.
It is. And this lack of marriage, coupled with the tumultuous atmosphere in Florence, inevitably led to speculation about his sexuality. Specifically, concerning a charge found in the Florentine archives from November 1502.
The charge simply reads, Botticelli keeps a boy, which was an accusation of sodomy.
It's a serious accusation, but scholars are heavily divided on how to interpret it.
What are the two main arguments?
Well, one side argues it has to be dismissed as standard Savonarola-era slander. Accusations of sodomy were a common political weapon used to discredit rivals during that religiously charged period. The charge itself was likely never proven.
And the other side?
The other side cautions against dismissing it too quickly, noting that the allegation exists regardless of the political climate. And some also observe a certain homoerotic sensibility in his religious works, particularly in the androgynous grace of his nude young saints, like Saint Sebastian.
So he dies in 1510, and he's buried as he wished in Ognissanti. And this brings us back full circle to the central paradox of our deep dive.
The complete and utter eclipse of his reputation.
It's extraordinary. Botticelli's reputation suffered longer and more thoroughly than virtually any other major European artist of his stature.
His style, which was so personal and intentionally archaic in his later years, it just fell completely out of fashion as the high Renaissance masters, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, came to define the new century.
For centuries, his masterpieces, Venus and Primavera, remained tucked away in private Medici villas or obscure churches, overlooked, ignored, or misattributed.
His paintings were truly ignored until the mid-19th century. They just didn't fit the tastes of the Baroque, Rococo, or Neoclassical periods. They were seen as too linear, too flat, too primitive.
So what was the spark? What ended 400 years of silence?
The pivotal moment seems to be 1857 in England. The Mystical Nativity, that small, intensely personal, archaic painting, was exhibited at the massive Art Treasures exhibition in Manchester, where it was seen by over 1 million people.
1 million people saw this strange, slightly anti-modernist relic, and that triggered an entire movement.
Exactly. The public visibility led directly to artistic and literary reappraisal. The pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, who prized early, pure Renaissance styles, they embraced him immediately. And crucially, the aesthetic movement, championed by the critic Walter Pater, took up his cause.
And Pater's analysis captured that unique melancholic spirit of Botticelli's work for a new generation. The grace that Vasari sought was rediscovered, leading to this absolute flood of books and exhibitions between 1900 and 1920, solidifying his massive modern reputation.
The resurrection was complete. From a man deemed obsolete and forgotten, he became once again monumentally valued, a status confirmed by that staggering 2021 sale of one of his portraits for $92.2 million.
The little barrel from Ognissanti is now one of the most expensive artists in history.
So we've journeyed far beyond just the iconic image of Venus today.
We have. We've seen Botticelli as the complex, deeply rooted Florentine figure he truly was. Alessandro de Mariano di Vanni Filipepi, a master goldsmith turned painter, completely entangled in the political machinery of the Medici.
Even down to the level of public humiliation via pittura infamante. He was a visual genius, capable of synthesizing complex pagan Neoplatonism with profound Christian devotion, using the language of mythology to talk about divine love.
And yet he also showed this radical willingness to just abandon the aesthetic principles of the rising high Renaissance, the principles his rivals were perfecting, in favor of a more expressive, emotional, and personal archaic style.
A style clearly driven by the turmoil of Savonarola's Florence.
His career arc, From the height of the Sistine Chapel and the mythological masterpieces to that profoundly troubled final style, it gives us a complete picture of an artist who was hypersensitive to the political and religious currents swirling around him.
Currents that ultimately ensured his immediate work just fell out of favor.
So what does this all mean for you grappling with art history? Botticelli was incredibly prolific. He produced dozens of popular devotional works and these revolutionary mythological canvases, and yet his reputation went completely dark for 4 centuries.
Considering that such a foundational master of the Renaissance could be so thoroughly ignored, it really compels us to consider the sheer randomness of historical reputation.
What other great innovative artists, prolific and successful in their own time, might currently be in their eclipse phase? Their masterworks gathering dust in overlooked collections, just waiting for their own 19th century Walter Pater or pre-Raphaelite moment of rediscovery.
It makes you wonder what truly great forgotten masterpieces are simply waiting for history to finally decide to care.